Welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast, lessons from the study of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis of blessed memory, a podcast addressing today's trends and headlines through interviews and conversations with Jewish leaders, inspired by the works of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis that make Jewish wisdom more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to today's complicated world. Our guests share their Jewish journeys and discuss how Rabbi Schulweis's wisdom provides inspiration and guidance to us today. Hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach, Senior Rabbi at Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, California, and board member of the Harold M. Schulweis Institute, an affiliate of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California.
It's so nice to see you. It's so nice to be in this conversation with you. Sarah Hurwitz, I am in love with Here All Along. I think it should be required reading for everyone I meet. Everyone thinking about rabbinical school has to read it. Everyone thinking about finding themselves in yoga has to read it. Everyone who comes to shul twice a year, unsure why they don't get more out of it or why they even come at all. So if you're okay, I'll just spend the next hour gushing about my love for you.
That is very kind. I really appreciate that.
And of course, your newer book, As a Jew, I'm just getting into. The titles of both of these books are so, aside from the books are beautiful and wonderful, the titles are so perfect.
Oh, thank you. They're very long. They're very long titles.
Well, I've been calling it Here All Along to every person I talk to. I've talked about it from the Bima. I've not called it Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection into Life in Judaism after finally choosing to look there, which is a longer title. But
it's a lot. It makes sense to just shorten to the main title.
Yeah, but Here All Along says exactly what I want it to say. It sums up the whole thing, which is essentially when you're looking for spirituality, you don't have to put one together yourself. There is one that already exists, that's been around for thousands of years, that is imperfect and is tested by time and tragedy, and you might find something deep there.
Yes, exactly.
And I love that, like, the new theme of all of these modern Jewish books, at least the ones that are in my world, are about loving Judaism. Sharon Browse's Amen Effect, Shai Held's Judaism is about love, Yitzhak Greenberg's The Triumph of Life. Like, all of these are just like such positive, and yours is in this pantheon of modern Jew-loving classics.
Oh, thank you.
So how did you get to writing these books about Judaism?
Yeah, so, I grew up like, I think probably the vast majority of American Jews, where Judaism for me was, 4 holidays, 2 of which were very boring in a synagogue, and one of which was medium boring at a Seder, and one of which was great, Hanukkah. And then, it was those 4 holidays and then 5 universalistic values that any decent human being would agree with, right? Like, don't lie, cheat, steal, kill, care for the vulnerable. And I just thought, this is not particularly compelling. I just thought, right. I think nothing to see here. I kind of walked away from it. And then, many years later, in my mid-30s, I broke up with a guy I was dating. I was very lonely and anxious, and I happened to hear about an Intro to Judaism class at the local Jewish Community Center. And I just signed up on a whim, like really just to fill some time on a Wednesday night. I figured, I'm a cultural Jew. I should know about my culture. I actually was not a cultural Jew, because cultural Jews actually know about and engage with Jewish culture, history, thought, language, food, music, which is a beautiful way to be Jewish. I didn't know any of that. I meant like, haha, I'm kind of anxious. Haha, I like to read books. I didn't have it right. Very Seinfeld, very thin. But, in that class, I found 4,000 years of wisdom from millions of my ancestors about what it means to be human. I just thought, where has this been all my life? I couldn't believe it. I then took another Intro to Judaism class, and then I started reading books and studying with rabbis, and I just was really stunned at how, the Judaism I grew up with was so oddly edited to leave out this 4,000 years of radical, transformative wisdom about how to be a person in the world.
Is it fixable? I mean, aside from me telling everybody to read your book, obviously, and other wonderful books out there, and I wonder, does cultural Judaism still exist?
I mean, I think it does. I think there are certainly Jews who engage very deeply with Judaism through Jewish culture, right? Like they're maybe not particularly interested in Jewish prayer or any kind of the spiritual aspects, but they care a lot about history, about Israel, so I do think there are many actually cultural Jews who have very rich Jewish identities. But most of the time when people say, I'm just a cultural Jew, it means they have a very minimal kind of engagement with Judaism. So it's not actually
Right,
accurate when they say that.
right,
That's not what they are. It's not what
right.
I was.
I think they're thinking Chinese food on Christmas
Right,
makes me a
right.
cultural Jew, as opposed to there is deep culture.
Right. And I think what they understand is they've actually intuited that Judaism is not just a religion, right? Like you and I can reject every aspect of Jewish religion and we're still Jews because Judaism, it's not just a religion, nor is it a race. I mean, look at how diverse we are. Not just one race, nor is it
Right.
an ethnicity. Again, we're very diverse people. We are something that predates the modern categories of race, ethnicity, or religion. We are a peoplehood, a tribe, a family, a civilization. And I think when Jews say, I'm just a cultural Jew, they're gesturing at that. They know they don't want to do anything Jewish, but they know they are in some way Jewish that they can't quite describe. And that's certainly how I felt.
Right. And what does that do? How does that shape their lives, if at all?
It doesn't particularly. I think after October 7th, it's starting to mean more to people because they're seeing people talking about Jews and Israel, anti-Semitism all the time. They're probably experiencing anti-Semitism. If you look at the data, it is really incredibly depressing about the number of Jews who've experienced anti-Semitism, and they're beginning to think like, wait a second, okay, I'm a Jew, now what? Like, what does this actually mean? Why is this important? How do I want to act on this? And
Hmm.
so I do think there's this exciting moment where you know, people I think are more open. I mean, this is when we talk about the surge in the Jewish community. There's been this surge of interest and engagement post October 7th, and I think that's sort of reflecting that awakening of like, oh my gosh, I'm a Jew. What does this mean?
Yeah. I mean, I struggle. I teach the 11th and 12th graders at our synagogue in this wonderful program that we have. And I wonder, what tools do I have to give them? In
Mm,
the, there's no tests. It's once a week or every other week, unless there's a holiday or prom or AP tests. What tools can we give them so they can enter the real world knowing Judaism? Because as much as I want them to come back at 36 and go, I've discovered it, it makes sense to me, I want them to like graduate high school. And some of them have
right,
been in Hebrew school or preschool that was Jewish, and they're coming away with like such the basics, right?
right,
They know the Aleph Bet and they know some of the holidays, like you said. And I
right.
wonder, like, what can we give them to give them a robust Jewish background to know that there is something here?
Right. I mean, I think the problem is we're right now reckoning. This is a much bigger problem where we are right now reckoning with our transition to modernity 200 years ago. And this is an important thing for Jews to understand about our history is, and now I'm just talking about European Jews. Obviously, there are Jews who have roots in Africa and Asia. However, the majority of American Jews have their roots in Europe. So this history is particularly relevant for American Jews. But roughly 200, 250 years ago, Jews in Europe lived in very insular Jewish communities, right? Like they lived by Jewish law that was enforced by Jewish leaders. They spoke Jewish languages. They ate Jewish foods. You sent your kid to get a Jewish education. You weren't a German of the Jewish faith because citizenship in modern nation states didn't yet exist. You lived in a Jewish community as a Jew 24/7. But then, soon in modern nation states, people begin getting the rights of citizens. And there becomes this question, well, wait a second. What about these Jews in France or Germany? Are they really Frenchmen or Germans, or are they part of this separate Jewish nation? This was the Jewish question. And Jews who understandably wanted the privileges of citizenship said, oh, no, 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 no. We're not a separate people or nation or tribe or civilization. We're just like you. We just go to a different church. Judaism is not a peoplehood, a tribe, a family, a nation. It's a Protestant style religion. So, you have a church, we have a Jew church. Look, we've even, installed stained glass so it looks like your church. You believe in God, so do we. You have the Old Testament, we do too. In fact, we actually invented it. However, Jewish tradition also has 2,500 years of texts after the Bible that are in many ways the beating heart of our tradition. This is where we have debated so many of the most important questions of Jewish existence. If you've ever been to a Shiva, which is when the Jewish community gathers to support someone who's in mourning, right? It's 7 days long traditionally. You come, you just sit with people who are in mourning to support them. It's not in the Torah, right? That these are traditions that later commentators and rabbis developed, but again, because we sort of jammed a Protestant cookie cutter into Judaism about 200 years ago and got rid of everything that didn't fit, we have this odd Protestant shaped Judaism that I
Yeah.
think, unfortunately, threw out some of the most exciting, brilliant parts of our tradition. And that's what I grew up with. I think that's what a lot of American Jews have grown up with.
Right. And we as Jews are rabbinic Jews. we're not living the words of the Torah. And it's strange to get up there and read the Torah. I mean, it's beautiful to read the Torah each week, and the fact that there's this through line for thousands of years. And also to know how we do Judaism today, almost none of it's in the Torah. You never have, I mean, some people often say like, well, I feel spiritual like Abraham and Sarah when I light Shabbat candles. I go like, that's beautiful. And also they didn't light Shabbat candles. Like that's
This is the thing, right? Like, we don't, if you are a Jew like me, like, I really thought there were a grand total of 2 Jewish texts. Torah, thing on scrolls, prayer book I was holding in my hand, that's the Judaism. What people don't understand is the Torah is not the end of the Jewish textual tradition. It's kind of the beginning. We've spent 2,500 years interpreting, debating, questioning all what it means to be human, and there are just millions and millions of pages of Jewish wisdom on how to be a good parent, child, spouse, sibling, colleague, neighbor, friend. So much wisdom about how to live a life. But I think that honestly, people just think of Judaism as either the kind of Protestant version they grew up with, or very Orthodox people following lots and lots of ritual rules, which is not fair to either of those ways of doing it. It's a very very simplistic understandings of Judaism, but that's not what this tradition is. But how would you know that if your only points of contact with Judaism are 4 holidays and a handful of universalistic values? You wouldn't. I think we actually have to teach people what Judaism is. And it's not a Protestant style religion. It's really not.
right. I mean, it's based in text, it's based in study, and we come
Yeah.
together in these Protestant style pews in our
Yes.
beautiful vaulted synagogues with the stained glass windows, and it's really pretty. And it feels, you stand when I say stand and you sit when I say sit.
Yeah.
And
It's this.
I love just like opening the Talmud with my students of any age, just to look at this, because I don't know if like Bereshit, if Genesis is poetry, or if I don't think it's a history book. And so, did Adam and Eve really exist in a garden with a talking serpent? I don't know, but I believe that Rebbe Meir and Beruria really existed and had to
Right.
grapple with loss. I believe that Rebbe Yochanan and Reish Lakish really existed and dealt with this struggle of how do you talk to people you disagree with.
Right.
Those people are real.
Right. And the problem is, we've convinced Jews that the only form of Jewish spiritual practice is scripted communal prayer in a synagogue, which of course is it is an important form of spiritual practice. But I would argue that Jewish study is actually a more central and important form of spiritual practice. And it's not, to me, it's not an intellectual practice. I think if you just see it simply as an intellectual process, I think you're kind of missing it. Missing it. What it is it's trying to hear the voice of the divine through the voices of our ancestors as they've grappled with all these questions of human existence and tried to pass on their wisdom down to us. And I will say, I agree with you. I don't think that the Torah is a history book. I don't think it's a science textbook, but I do think it is sacred truth in the way that, like, look, was there an actual boy who actually cried wolf? I don't know, but it doesn't really matter for me to understand the value of that story. Whereas, I look at Genesis, Bereshit, the first book of the Torah, which was the first 5 books of the Tanakh, or what Christians call the Old Testament, and you have 2 totally different creation stories. The first one, God creates the world and human beings in this very orderly fashion. God is distant, kind of sterile. It all goes according to plan. God says this is good. And then you have another creation story where God is like literally breathing into the nostrils of the first human being, and then ripping this human being's rib out to create the first woman. And God is pounding around the Garden of Eden and is chit chatting with these human beings, and they're disobeying him. It is messy and relational and concrete. So it's like, wait, sorry, is God radically transcendent and sterile and kind of impersonal, or is God relational and embodied and right here with us? And like Jewish tradition's answer is yes. Like, I think to me that is just so, that operating in polarities, that you can hold an idea of God as both radically transcendent, impersonal, kind of far away, and also very personal, immanent, right here, able to form relation. Like, Jewish tradition has both of those conceptions of the divine, often in the same person. And like, how powerful is that? Right?
Yeah.
This is, we operate in polarities. I think the Torah is in many ways teaching us a way of thinking and a way of understanding whether or not it's factually accurate.
I think one of the most incredible parts of Here All Along for me was the section on theology. I studied theology, I studied philosophy. When I was in rabbinical school, we had to pick like which track we were on, and either it was picked for me. Somehow I got into the philosophy track, and you sum up Rambam's theology in one page better than anything I've ever read similar to that. So like kudos to you. And since this is a podcast that really looks at the legacy of Rabbi Harold Schulweis, who I grew up at his feet. I grew up a kid in that synagogue. He was on the bima for my bar mitzvah. He was there at my wedding. He helped bury my grandparents. I didn't realize how unique he was as a thinker. Honestly, maybe until I read I've read his books, and I've talked to how many dozens, hundreds, thousands of people about him. And yet in your book, like the fact that you come up with like, here's whatever it is, a handful, 8 theologies. And he was one of them. I was like, oh, he really is unique in this world.
Yeah.
And right. So and you sum it up beautifully, although I believe his theology is like pretty easy to get, that it's through us. What we do in the world brings godliness into the world. How did you find Schulweis? Do you remember who pointed you towards, like, you picked Kushner, Schulweis, Artson? I mean, some of my favorite teachers.
Yeah.
How did you come to them?
It's a good question. I don't totally remember. I probably encountered them in secondary sources that I was looking at. And, especially these more modern thinkers, they're often drawing on many traditional sources, right? They didn't make up these theologies just out of thin air. Like, they were really looking at traditional Jewish texts to come up with these ideas, or to sort of express these ideas for a modern audience. And that's just something I really appreciated about all of them, is that they're making this accessible for a modern audience of people who aren't going to sit around reading ancient texts all day in Hebrew and Aramaic, which, like, you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to do that to have access to our tradition, which is why I'm really fond of Jewish thinkers and writers who write in an accessible way, that, just an average Jew like me can just open it up and understand what they're talking about. Maimonides, or Rambam, is not someone who necessarily is accessible that way, but there's a great professor named Kenneth Seeskin, who wrote a book called The Guide for Today's Perplexed, which is an unbelievable, kind of very short, 100 or so pages explanation of a lot of Maimonides' thought. And it's fantastic. It was critical for me, for my book.
I also wonder if he were alive now, right? He died like 900 years ago. If he were alive now, would he write in a more readable way? Things were just written differently back then, and now we're reading like translations of translations.
Yeah, and he was writing some of his texts were for a very elite audience, so it was sort of deliberately written in a sophisticated way. So yeah, it's a good question.
In the book, you bring up all of these theologies, and you also point out some problems with them as well, which I love. One of my teachers in school was Elliot Dorff. Uh-huh. Rabbi Dorff is, just a sunshine of a human being. Love him so much. And in his class, we would study like a theology for a week. And so we knew it inside and out. And then he'd go, okay, what are the problems with it? He'd even bring in his own theology. And like that week, we'd be like, what do we all think of Dorff's theology? And we're like, what can we say to Rabbi Dorff about Dorff theology? Like, he goes, what are the problems? Right. But he knows the problems with his own theology. And right. You point out like all of these kind of, you don't have to pick one. In the years since this book, you've been studying a lot more. You've been talking to rabbis. You've been talking to so many people. Has your theology changed, solidified, gone totally astray?
I wouldn't say it's changed or solidified. I think it's, I tend to I continue to just be informed by a number of different Jewish conceptions of the divine. I'm informed by the mystical conception that says God is everything. Like, you're God, I'm God. The idea there's any barrier between us, that's an illusion. I'm informed by Buber, who says that God is what happens between two people in deep relationship. Both fully seeing each other as full human beings in those moments of profound connection. What arises between them is God. I love Heschel's thinking about the divine, about the importance of awe and radical amazement. I'm moved by Mordecai Kaplan, an American rabbi, this idea that God is the process by which each of us becomes the highest version of ourselves, right? By which the acorn becomes the oak tree, or the person develops into something higher. Like, they all kind of inform me. I don't think that's the great thing about Jewish. I hate the word theology; it doesn't feel Jewish to me. But Jewish grappling with the divine is that we're not required to recite a creed or to embrace any particular dogma or conception of the divine, which I appreciate, because I think to do that is to shrink the divine to human terms. Once you start talking about God, you necessarily shrink God to this small human size that our little brains can comprehend, and it gets a little bit kind of starts to verge into some kind of idolatry. Right, we're kind of creating a human-sized version of God to fit our capacity.
Right. One of the pastors in our area, like at a mega church out here, said one of his big worries is that he's forming God in his image.
Yes, that is a big right. And there are people that's a common thing.
Sure, and I love that he was able to say that to me, that
Right.
he was worried that he's taking his ideals and putting that on God instead of reading holy works and going, okay, now I'm trying to understand God, who's in what that is impossible to understand, because in the first 2 pages of the Bible, God seems to be two things at the same time that are contradictory, and so it's okay to not know.
Right. I mean, I don't think, again, like the idea that we have to come up with a definition or creed or theology singular of God. I don't know. Jews, we typically haven't really focused on that. This isn't, again, like I understand that, Christianity is about, the faith is sort of central, right? If you don't have the faith, if you say like, I don't believe in God or Jesus, I'm a total atheist. I mean, I'm sure you can still be a Christian, I guess, but I think a lot of people would say like, probably not. A lot of Christians would be like, you can't really be a Christian if you don't believe in God or Jesus. Like the faith is sort of central to the faith because it's a faith. But we're a civilization, we're a people, we're a tribe, we're a nation. You see Jews with all kinds of conceptions and lack of conceptions of the divine, and they're still just as Jewish as you and I or any other Jew.
Right. It's strange that you can have a Jewish deli in Iowa run by Korean people, and it's still a Jewish deli. Right. There is no Methodist restaurant. You've never seen a movie and be like, this feels very Episcopal to me. Like,
right.
It's to be culturally one of those is so different. I think the first time I realized that, I was a chaplain at Children's Hospital, and there was a girl going in for surgery, and her grandfather was there, and they were praying, and I entered the room, and how strange it was that I was asked to pray with people.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, do you have a prayer book? Like,
this is the thing that's so interesting. I did 4 units of clinical pastoral education or chaplaincy training. And, it is definitely, while chaplaincy is interfaith, it's called chaplaincy. So it's like, and that's kind of the vibe of it, where they're like, prayer is, God, please heal my friend Ari, who's right here, as I make this up from my heart with no ancient prayer. It's like, I mean, that is a beautiful form of prayer, and Jews, of course, can pray that way if they want, but I don't think I've ever really seen a Jew pray like that for another Jew. It's not a common form of Jewish prayer. And my Muslim classmate was like, we don't really pray that way either. Even my Catholic classmates were like, it's not really how we pray either. It's like, so why are we all acting like this is universal prayer? It's probably not.
And I wonder if like the Jews of the Mishnah were praying that way. Before it was so set, 1,200 years ago, they were just on the road, and they would stop on their journey from a city to a city, and they would have a moment of prayer. And we've lost a little bit of that. We try to encourage it, but it's also really clunky. Like you talk about Heat Bodadu, taking 30 minutes a day, an hour a day to go find a quiet place where you can just talk on end to the universe, the self, divinity. And like we need a little bit of that training.
I think that's true. I think that can get you to a place where you kind of break through kind of barriers and conceptions and like, oh, what am I doing? I don't believe in this. Like it's kind of a way of overrunning those barriers, that embarrassment, by just forcing yourself to speak out loud, keep talking. But I also think, that can't really be the only form of Jewish prayer. Like we're a communal people. A lot of our spirituality comes in community. And to me, a lot of the beauty of the prayer book, well, I wouldn't say that synagogue is really where I find my deepest connection to Jewish tradition. It does move me to think that I know, right? Shocking. It does move me to think that I'm saying the same words as my grandmother and her grandmother and just centuries worth of grandmothers before them, right? Like this is something that ties me to Jews back through time, and also today to Jews around the world, right? This is kind of our shared tradition. So I think like a lot of the kind of self-helpy, like, oh my gosh, this is just like so me, and this thing is me, and I get to express me and explore me. Like that's lovely, and please do. But like, there's also something to be said for we and for transcending me and going beyond the self. I think there's something important that our tradition offers that's kind of a corrective to the modern self-centered, hyper-individualistic, and very narcissistic secular ethic of like, you do you, girlfriend.
Right. I love that I've been to countries where I don't speak the language. I was in Prague or Paris or wherever I've been, and I cannot do anything. I cannot order food. I cannot talk to a cab driver, but I can go to a synagogue, and I can go
Yeah.
into a synagogue in Prague or wherever, and I can pray with them, that the words are the same and familiar. So it goes through
Yeah.
time to my great 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 grandparents, and it also, and God willing, my great 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 grandkids. I don't know, and also to go anywhere in the world, and every week they're on the same parsha, whether you're in Jerusalem or Los Angeles or Sydney, it doesn't matter,
Right. Right.
and to have the same words. But yeah, it would be right. Wait, going back to that hospital room, I was also aware. Here's this girl and her grandfather, and she's about to go in for surgery, and we're praying. And I said, "Are your parents around?" And she goes, "Well, they're not Christians." And like I was in my, I don't know, late 20s, going, "What do you mean? Like, isn't everybody who's not like Jewish or Muslim Christian?" And she was like, "No, they just, like, they're not believers, and since they have not accepted the theology that I also espouse, we can't include them in the same
Mm.
orb." And here we are. There are people. I don't know if anybody in my synagogue. I don't know if anybody in my friend group has the same theology that I
Right.
do, and yet, great, we can still pray together and learn together
Right.
and
It's
dive into
about,
it.
my friend Michal Biton, who's a great scholar and spiritual leader. She talks a lot about the idea of, it's not about ideology, it's about solidarity. There, we can get very caught up in our differing ideologies, and we can argue, and are you this kind of Zionist or that Zion, or not this or that? Are you Orthodox or from? But it's like, okay, that's great, but we're not just a religion. If we were just a religion, that would be it, right? We would have to just work that out, fight that out. But we're a people, a tribe, a family, right? So it's like the 7 million Jews in Israel are not my co-religionists. They're my mom. Like, it's just a category error to think of. It's a category error to think of fellow Jews as someone who share your ideology or don't. That's incorrect. They're your family at heart, and they may or may not share your ideology, and you may fight with them a lot, and they may drive you crazy. But I think I would put them more in the category of family than co-religionist or sharer of an ideology.
Yeah, which makes it really hard when people who are or more orthodox on that side tell me that I'm doing Judaism wrong, and I think that
Right.
we're all kind of doing it the way that we're trying to.
Or people who are more progressive say that, oh, those Orthodox people are doing Judaism wrong. There's a lot of people telling others that they're doing Judaism wrong, and I don't find that all that
Yes,
compelling. I got to tell you, it doesn't do much for me.
right. But I'm also like, there was a kid who I was there for his bar mitzvah, and now he's turned Orthodox, and I have family who's Orthodox. Some of my best friends are Orthodox, and he was telling me his Judaism, and I was going, I don't know if we're right. I guess it makes sense to say you're my brother as opposed to we believe the
Yeah.
same thing,
Yeah, I mean, I
because
practice, there are lots of
yeah,
Jews who I believe very differently from, I practice very differently from. And there are family members who I have who I'm very different from ideologically. And that's okay. They're still my family. I think, again, we've sort of degraded the ethic of family. We're in a time in modern culture where it's like, oh, my family is not emotionally satisfying for me, I'm going to estrange myself, right? I think we become a little bit looser with how much we respect the idea of family, and I think I kind of see us doing that with Judaism as well. And I that does worry me because there aren't that many of us in the world, right? 16 million is about the size of a city in China, and so I don't think we can afford to, I don't know, be excluding some people and saying some Jews aren't really Jews. It's like, let's not do that. I don't
yeah.
I don't love that.
I'm I'm working on an analogy, and I'll be working on it for the next 50 years until you write the book before I get there, which is like trying to explain Judaism is like, imagine a world where, let's pick like a Albania invades America, just to pick a wag the dog reference.
Right.
They invade America, and we move to some other country, Bolivia, and we're trying to live in Bolivia as Americans, and we can't, and then our family starts to wander. We end up in Japan, or we end up in Senegal, and we're just trying to go, okay, what do you do to be an American? And in that way, and imagine 1,000 years from now, when my great great whatever grandkids don't speak a lick of English, but they want to feel connected to their roots of being American. And so what do? Is they say the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning, and they celebrate Flag Day, which we don't celebrate here, but like it lines up in the calendar of wherever they're living with a more major holiday. So like that's the big day for them. And they and it doesn't look anything like how we live now. And like, there's something about it being a civilization that we are able to take it with us and make it our own, and it looks different depending on where we are. I don't know. I'm often asked to speak at like a comparative religion class, and like I kind of want to walk in and just be like, "We're not a religion," and then walk out. And be like, I know I have another hour to talk to you, but like,
That's, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I wonder if, I mean, is American identity as deep and thick and sustainable as Jewish identity? I don't think it is, although I do worry that a lot of forms of modern Jewish identity are about as thin as modern American identity. So it's a tough one.
yeah. If I can just get personal before we get back to the
Yeah.
big picture too, how did you become? I mean, I know some of your backstory, and anybody can look it up. But how did you become a writer? Was it high school? Was there a moment at Harvard that somebody sat you down and went, "Look, you're really good at this"? How did you go from being somebody who writes 5-paragraph essays to somebody who makes their career as writing speeches, writing books?
Yeah, so I actually got my start in speech writing in the summer of 1998. It was the summer between my junior and senior years of college, where I did an internship at the White House, and I was originally placed in the scheduling and advance office, which deals with the logistics of travel for the vice president. So it was like making rental car arrangements and things like that. And then I and a few other interns crashed a goodbye party for one of Vice President Gore's staffers who was leaving to move on to their next job, and we managed to sneak into this party, and I met a guy who was one of Gore's speechwriters, and it turned out he'd grown up in the town next door to mine. And so we started talking, and I was like, I would love to help you. Can I volunteer? Can I be a part-time intern for you? And he was really kind and said yes. And my other office let me kind of split my time, and then I slowly moved over to being full-time in the vice president's speechwriting office. And those writers were very generous to me and helped me get my first couple of jobs out of college. And I actually wasn't a very good speechwriter back then. I was a decent writer, but I just didn't know how to write for the ear rather than for the eye. Writing to be heard is very different from writing to be read. But then so actually my second job, which was it was as a speechwriter to a U.S. Senator named Tom Harkin, lovely guy from Iowa. After about a year, his chief of staff was like, I hear you're thinking about law school. You should go. Like, I just never really got the senator's voice. I just wasn't that good. So I went to law school. In my third week of class, I met a guy named Josh Gottheimer, who is now a congressman from New Jersey. But back then, he was just one of my law school classmates, and he had previously been a speechwriter for President Clinton. And the two of us just started freelance writing together, just freelance speech writing to make money for law school. And he really taught me how to structure a speech, how to write for the ear instead of the eye. And we wound up getting jobs on Wesley Clark's primary campaign for president in 2003, and he lost. Then we worked for John Kerry in 2004, and he lost. I was briefly a lawyer, and then I got hired as Hillary Clinton's chief speechwriter in 2008 for her campaign, and she lost. And then I fortunately got hired on the Obama campaign in 2008, and he won. And so that is how I made it to the White House.
Is that a usual? First of all, is law school often part of it?
No.
So okay.
No, absolutely not. Nothing I learned in law school was remotely helpful in speechwriting. Not at all. Totally inapplicable.
Is there a point where the Obamas ask you to work with them, or the campaign does, and you go, I don't have a very good track record? Like, are you sure?
I know. I mean, it's funny. I did joke, like, showing up to that campaign. I mean, I've only been on losing campaigns. Must have made them a little nervous, but fortunately I didn't jinx it that time around, so very lucky.
And how big is a team of speechwriters usually? Is there a normal?
It really varies. The campaign team was probably 4 people. In the White House, it was probably more like 7-ish. But there are people who work for the president. There's people who work for the first lady. People work for the vice president. There's different people have different bosses.
Do you ever listen to a political speech now and go, that line was definitely written by this person?
No, I can't. I mean, I can't. I don't think I could recognize any particular writers writing today.
We were watching some movie, and we're like, we could tell like which one was like the Tony Kushner line, and which one was like the, just like there's a certain weight to it. You could tell when Tommy Schlamme did an episode of The West Wing. I don't know. There's like
right.
A certain...
No, definitely. I don't think I could. Not today. Maybe years ago I might have been able to, but not today.
And have you ever taught a class to rabbis, but like, okay, your sermons are okay. Let's teach you how to write it so that it sounds like
I did the Maimonides Fund. They actually did a really great series of seminars to help rabbis prepare for their High Holy Day sermons
Hmm.
maybe a couple of years ago. So I did just one webinar for that, which was fun.
Yeah, yeah. So just getting back to, I just wanted to go there. Getting back to the
Yeah.
book, though, it seems like one of the issues that we have today that you address in both your books is people forsaking their Judaism, people not knowing that they can look there, people bogged down by anti-Semitism. And so, why is Judaism uncool? Why is it something that people just don't hold on to? Do you have an idea around that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the answer, I think in large part is the persecution that has led us to try to assimilate and to try to make our Judaism like Protestantism. And as a result, the Judaism that we inherited today, it doesn't really totally make sense. It's not very compelling or very deep, and that's a result of our ancestors just trying to be safe, right? Trying to assimilate, trying to fit in, trying to have the same opportunities that you and I take for granted to have jobs and attend universities. The people, the majorities around them said to them, you can't be part of a peoplehood or a civilization or tribe. You have to be Germans, you have to be French people, you have to sort of
Right.
leave behind all those aspects of your tradition that don't fit into a religion. And I think Jews themselves were like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to be a religion just like Christianity so that we can have the rights of citizenship. But why did they have to do that? I think if the majorities around them had said, look, hey, we trust that you can be citizens of Germany and France and still be really devoted Jews who feel like you're part of a civilization, a tribe, a family. We have no problem with that. Please don't. You don't have to assimilate. You don't have to be like us to be respected and acceptable and allowed into our universities, our workplaces. I think we would have a very different kind of Judaism today.
Do you think it's because we're able to assimilate? Like, people who are other ethnicities can't assimilate. They are who they are based on what you can see from 50 feet away. And Jews are able to kind of hide their Judaism and go, okay, let me just, and that means this, the more we do that, the more we want to hide in culture anyway.
I think that that's part of it. Like many Jews are able to do that. I mean, Jews who are observant, who really are devoted to Judaism, can't necessarily hide it. Right? They're actually that's hard. But I think if you are someone who wants to hide, you know, Jews have certainly changed their names. They've gotten nose jobs. They've found ways to hide, and that's not a new phenomenon, unfortunately. So it is certainly possible. It's a very sad history of us doing that. So I wouldn't say it's a recipe for a happy life.
Right. And it's not new. I mean, right. Silverstein and Goldberg are not in the Torah. So we assimilated into culture in that way. In fact, so many of the names, even the names in the Mishnah, there's I don't know if I should say that. Like, I have a who's who of the Talmud behind me, but like, there's no Rabbi Moshe, but there is Rabban Gamliel. Like, there is no Gamliel that I know of in the Torah, and so we've been kind of part of society in and out for a really long
Of course,
time.
we have all kinds of different names depending on where we've lived. I mean, Moses has an Egyptian name because of his unique circumstances of his birth. I mean, I think
Right.
right, that's part. I think that we always, in some ways, take on some of the aesthetic qualities of the people around us, as many minority groups do. But the question is, do we rip the beating heart out of our tradition to fit in, or do we kind of do some aesthetic things to fit into society, but also really honor the 4,000 years of wisdom we had, right? And I think Jews today, we're very lucky in America to, despite the terrible anti-Semitism that is very real and very scary, no one is going to stop me from studying the texts that are the beating heart of my tradition. Thank God, right? There's so many opportunities for me to engage deeply in Judaism and still, participate in modern society, although that is certainly getting harder.
Yeah. Right. I worry about what's happening on college campuses, which you've spoken and written about at length.
Yeah.
And the fact that, right, I went to NYU and there was no question that I could be openly Jewish and talk to my roommate about going to Hillel or whatever else I was doing.
Right.
And now knowing that some of the students who sat in this office learning with me are now on college campuses where they would not openly say that they're Jewish. They don't tell their roommate the first month that they are going to Hillel. They'll just kind of say, oh, I'm going out to meet friends.
Right. Ugh. That's devastating.
Right, right. And you've been there, you've done the tours, you've gotten to talk to
Yeah.
them, which is like incredible. And I want to find out how we can, I mean, your books help, your talking helps, other people help, how we can make them know what their Judaism is. Because part of what I'm sad about is not only that they're hiding, but they're hiding from something they don't even know
I
what it
know.
is.
I know. I mean, I think one thing that just been important for me as I've spoken to college students is just helping them see clearly what it is they're dealing with. You know, I often, students will be like, well, maybe it's just not anti Semitism. Maybe it's just criticism of Israel, and that's not anti Semitic. I'm like, I agree. I don't think criticism of Israel is anti Semitic, but do you really think that's what's happening on your campus? And I often have to kind of operate an analogy to make them see things clearly. And I'll say to them, imagine if your classmates had some real criticisms of the Chinese government and their policies, and they decided to act on those criticisms and show their opposition to those policies and actions by going around to all your Chinese American classmates and saying to them, you have to immediately reject China. If you ever speak in Chinese, if you ever say anything positive about Chinese history, culture, people, if you visit family in China, if you study abroad in China, you are dead to us. You cannot join our campus clubs because our clubs have a no China lovers allowed policy. And then they held really violent, loud rallies where they were fully masked, screaming, we don't want no China lovers here, and Chinese people equal Nazis. I guess, do you see that as legitimate criticism of the Israeli government and its policies? I don't. I see that as racism. Yet that's what's happening on campus against Jewish students. And I think just seeing that, helping them see clearly what they're dealing with is critical. And I think they're often struggling to understand that it is anti Semitism because their only anti Semitism education is Holocaust education. So they are told anti Semitism is Nazi racial anti Semitism. It is hating Jews because you deem them racially inferior. However, another form of anti Semitism is Soviet anti Zionism, where for many decades the Soviets claimed not to hate Jews. God forbid, the Jews were fine, the problem was the Zionists. And they went on to assault, murder, brutally persecute, fire from jobs Jews because they were Zionists, so the Soviet Union claimed, right? That is, Zionism is racism. Lovely Soviet invention there. That's the kind of anti-Semitism you're seeing on college campuses, along with Islamist, really theological Jew hatred. But you don't learn about that in eighth grade. I think if our students spent as many hours as they spend on Holocaust education, if they studied the decades of Soviet anti-Zionism that led to Jews being brutally persecuted, I don't think they would find that kind of Soviet anti-Zionism that leads to their Jewish classmates being persecuted so enchanting. I think they might be able to recognize it for what it is, which is anti-Semitism.
Again, like sitting down these 17-year-olds and like, here's the world you're about to enter. It's been so
Yeah.
easy here.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so many of our people here, and I've been at different synagogues and different spaces where the core of their Judaism is anti-Semitism,
Right.
as opposed to loving Judaism.
Yeah.
If you walk into our synagogue, the first two things that you see are Holocaust memorials.
Mm.
Like, how do we? And so I've now put up these huge. I haven't. Our staff, our amazing team, has put up these huge posters of pictures taken at our synagogue this year. Right, here's us doing Havdalah. Here's us on these holidays. Here's us blowing shofar on the beach for Tashlich. Like these, like to go. So now when you walk in, you see these bright, colorful pictures of beautiful Jewish moments instead of just, like, look what they did to us. Because who wants to carry on a tradition that the whole point is they might kill us at any moment, so you better fight back. You're gonna be a victim.
Right. I think oftentimes people kind of, their core identity is as an anti-Semite because they don't know anything else, right? They don't have any Jewish content or substance or community, and so it's very accessible to just want to fight anti-Semitism. That's something that's in the news. It's clear. It's something that's objectively bad, but that's a kind of a bummer of a Jewish identity. It doesn't really
Yeah,
give you much in the way of deep, profound wisdom, spirituality, the beauty of our tradition. It's a sad way to be a Jew, I think.
right. Just tenacity and learning how to fight back. And I tried giving one time. I tried giving the Rabbi Hartman sermon of, like, there's the Auschwitz Jew and the Sinai Jew, and we
Right.
can either look at the world as out to get us, or you can look at how incredible our tradition is and our relationship with God or divinity or the universe is. It didn't go well when I gave it several years ago. I might have to try it
Right.
again at some point with a different
Right.
angle.
Right. And look, I think it's both. They're both true. These are two, like, again, if you're thinking about operating in polarity, is like, look at the Torah. We're told no fewer than 36 times, love the stranger. The stranger is the non Jew, the non Israelite. Like, love that person, care for that person. But we're also told to, like, remember Amalek. Remember the Amalekites, which were an enemy tribe that attacked the Israelites from behind in a really brutal way. And so it's like, love the stranger, but remember some strangers want to kill you. Be open hearted, be compassionate, but also don't be naive. I think there's kind of a holding on to both of those poles.
Right. And also, can we not label everybody Amalek? Amalek
Yes, that would be good.
exists and existed, and like there are people who don't like us, but not everybody who hates us
Right,
is
right.
Amalek.
I think there's a lot more, as my friend Dara Horn likes to say. I think there's a lot more ignorance than malice. I think that there's something to be said for that.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah.
You've said that the synagogue is not the place that you find your most spirituality, which, as a pulpit rabbi, tears me apart. But also, I know
Sorry.
it to be no, I know it to be true. That's like my world as well. And I think about my rabbi Harold Schulweis is like two of the things that he put into place. I'm sure there's a lot more, but two that he really put into place. One is chavrut. The idea of a chavara was really spearheaded by him, at least on the West Coast, which is take your Judaism home, own it as a community, as a family, get 5 or 10 families together for a Shabbat dinner, a Hanukkah party, a picnic in the park. Another one of his ideas is para-rabbinics, of training people to also take care of each other. So it's not just one rabbi who sits in his ivory tower who's you go to for your problems, but this like kind of Yitro in the Bible idea of like, how do you get more people to take care of the community?
Yeah, I love that idea. I love that idea of engaging lay people different, because there's so many amazing lay people, right? People who are deeply engaged and thoughtful and caring and would be amazing in those kinds of roles.
Right. And also, and you talk about this in your book too, but how many people are experts in their field and then come to a synagogue and feel worthless because they are the best engineer, lawyer, doctor, something, and they come in here, we're like, all right, now for 3 hours of chanting the Israeli phone book in Hebrew, and they're like, I'm dumb. And it's like to go, no, you have power, we need you in our
Right.
community, you're our go-to person.
Right. I think that's huge. I think, and I do kind of wonder if, that's certainly, I think you would describe my experience of synagogue services, which is like, you really could have read me an Israeli phone book. And if it were to the correct melody, I would probably have just thought it was fine, which makes me think that maybe, if the only times a year you're going to get people are 2 High Holy Day services, and they wouldn't know the difference between the phone book and the actual liturgy, maybe shorten the liturgy and maybe just like teach them something about Judaism. Like maybe do some Jewish study. But I know people get upset when there's any change. But I do think we need a big moment of Jewish education, like a really big moment of helping people understand that there's more to Judaism than 4 holidays and 5 universal values.
Yeah. I'm learning about Mordechai Kaplan a little bit more now, and he went to reconstruct Judaism, and he changed it and shortened the service and made so many major changes, and still nobody came to his synagogue.
I know it's a very small movement, yes.
Which is also fine, because the point doesn't have to be to have services here if people are living their Judaism out in the world.
Right.
What an incredible thing. I've got 700 more questions to ask you, but I feel like for the sake of your time and
no,
specifically,
I think we covered a lot of ground.
I know I've got so many quotes that I wanted to bring in. I've my book, I'm telling you, there's dog-eared pages and there's exclamation points everywhere going this is so good. And you quote, without making it clunky, you quote so many people and bring so many diverse opinions in of Jewish and non-Jewish. It's such a wonderful thing.
There's so many great Jewish thinkers and writers out there who I've been really inspired by and learned from. I wanted to do that.
Yeah, and one of my favorites is from somebody who's not Jewish. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. Frederica Matthews Green.
Yes.
You wrote that she wrote, constructing a safe, tidy, unsurprising God who could never transform me, but would only confirm my residence in that familiar bog I called home, is like when you're piecemeal together something that just makes sense for you. All of these places. But all right, so we conclude the podcast here, this conversation, with the question of, is there a text, a book, a prayer that you're studying, grappling with, disagreeing with, loving right now that you want to share with us?
Question. I'm reading Almost Alon's amazing biography of Theodore Herzl. It's really quite stunning and just beautifully written and really very well worth reading. So I'm just he's such a fascinating guy, a complicated guy, really just interesting guy who accomplished so much in a very short life. So it's definitely enjoying that.
That's really great. I'll have to take a look at that once I finish the other stack of books
Wait,
on my nightstand.
It is Theodore, right? I'm like always,
yeah.
I'm always like getting these things wrong. Yes, Theodore.
Yeah.
Herzl. Yes.
We have a program at my synagogue that we call it. It's a theater program. We call it Theater Herzl. So we get
seriously
some good, Jewish and Jewish adjacent ideas up there on the stage for small audiences, just for a little bit of fun.
That is fun.
Yeah, I could talk to you all day. I so appreciate your time with
my
us
pleasure.
today.
Thank you for
to talk
having
about
me.
your book and theology and Rabbi Schulweis and the
you.
future of Judaism. So thank you so much, and hope to see you for good things.
Thank you for listening to the Moral Courage podcast. We are produced by the Harold M. Schulweis Institute at Valley Beth Shalom, which supports these podcasts in addition to educational programs within Valley Beth Shalom, the Schulweis Library, changing exhibitions at the Liner Chapel at VBS, Jewish World Watch, and the Jewish Community Children's Choir. The Moral Courage podcast is hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach. Our consulting producer is Esther Kostanowitz. Our technical producer is Eric Weiser. We are grateful for the support of the Institute and Haley Lazitsky-Weiser at SadClown Productions. To learn more about Rabbi Schulweis or to make a donation to help support these podcasts, visit the Institute website at hmsi.info.